Okay, we're ready to roll in five, four, three, two, one. Bitcoin at its lowest level since mid-November following the Trump election surge and down 20% since Trump's inauguration. Is it time to buy that dip or time to run for cover from digital currencies altogether? Who better to ask than the founder and managing partner of SkyBridge, former White House press secretary Anthony Scaramucci, also the host of the Rest is Politics US podcast. You have to check that out. Great to see you, my friend. It's been a while, but let's start with Bitcoin and crypto. What is going on there with those numbers? So much enthusiasm upon the Trump election seems to be gone.
Well, I mean, listen, I think it was 69,000 when he got elected, and so it's I don't guess, but by 85,000 now, and so yeah, you had a correction, but you've had garden variety 28 to 40% corrections in bull markets of Bitcoin. So I know definitionally Bitcoin is now in a bear market because it's down 20% from its high, but really for Bitcoin that's common. We saw five oscillations like this last year. Of course, Bitcoin went from the high 30s, David, to the high 90s. So I don't see any reason why Bitcoin can't still close the year closer to 200,000. But listen, this is the nature of Bitcoin. And what happens is the renters of Bitcoin get churned out of Bitcoin and the long-term owners stay in. But I'll remind people that there's a legion of Wall Streeters now that are out there selling the idea that Bitcoin needs to be in people's portfolios. And so, if you don't believe me, ask the UAE and Mubadala. They got almost a $500 million position. University of Wisconsin. BlackRock's out there with their financial advisors, the consultants telling people to own it. And so I wouldn't bet against Bitcoin. Now, you've got a risk off thing happening in the markets generally, and you've had the worst hack. $1.5 billion was stolen by the North Korean government at a Bybit. So you've had the worst hack that probably happened since the Mount Gox debacle. And so, yeah, there's some weakness and there's some short-term negative sentiment, but I wouldn't overly worry about it.
There's been so many questions about what is it tethered to, and many an analyst has come on here and said, well, the best case for Bitcoin is essentially digital gold. Gold is up, not just in the last couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months. Is it digital gold, and why is one up while the other has fallen down over that same period?
Well, I mean, again, if you look at Bitcoin over the life of Bitcoin, it's gone up immeasurably relative to
Yeah.
gold, right? It started at zero. It's got a $2 trillion market cap now, so it's 10% of gold. Gold being approximately a $20 trillion market cap, and so if you step back, zoom out, I could build the case for you that Bitcoin's doing quite well. But I think you're making an interesting case. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. There's inflation. There's the specter of a recession in the United States. Some people are not going to like me saying this, but I am going to say it. This is along the theme of what Steve Cohen was articulating earlier last week, where he said tariffs are taxes, they're deconsumptive. Doge is an austerity program for the government. We know that when governments go into austerity, the growth of the overall economy shrinks. If you don't believe me, ask the United Kingdom that's been struggling with it for 15 years. And so somebody like Steve Cohen's looking at the footprint and saying, whoa, we've got inflation tamer, but still not totally tame, slightly hotter actually recently. We got the government cutting back on expenditures. And then we also have this factor of churn, if you will, this inertia that's going on, and that's going to hurt risk assets like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is still a risk on technology, a risk on technological asset. It's not digital gold today. If it adopts, and you tell me we've got 2 billion people owning it, then I can make that case.
But isn't it largely rising and falling on emotion?
Um, Well, I mean, again, is there value to the network? You tell me if there's value to the network. If there's value to the network, then no, I would take the opposite. I would say it's rising and falling on the fundamentals of the network, but it's a risk on asset. I'm not in the camp that Bitcoin is an inflation hedge at this moment or digital gold. It's a replacement for gold. I'm just not in that camp. So it's a risk asset. And so if you're telling me that risks are on, you're telling me Nvidia's doing well, the Nasdaq's doing well, Bitcoin will likely do well. If you're telling me that stuff, well, people are concerned today and those assets have sort of traded off, I'll say that. But let's just stop for a second. Bitcoin year over year, 12 months of Bitcoin is plus 75%.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's been a very good asset. If you bought it at 108, you're upset. And that's where some of the churn is, right? Because look at the volume, as you know from you're not quite old enough to remember the dot-com debacle, but I am. And
Sure I
what ends
am.
up happening is you get tremendous amount of volume at the top, and then it starts to crater, and then people start to lose their confidence in the situation.
Joel Kruger, who's a strategist at LMAX, said now it's a question of waiting for the next catalyst. He said there's room for it to go to 70 to 75 without doing anything to compromise the outlook. A lot to unpack there. What
Hmm.
do you think of that? What would be the next catalyst?
Yeah.
And if it falls to 70 or 75, why would that compromise the outlook? It seems like that would cause a mass panic. That would be well beyond correction territory.
Well, but that's Bitcoin. Bitcoin went from 69 to 15. It went from 20,000 to 2,000. Bitcoin has a tremendous amount of volatility. And so I would tell you that, at 75, it's still higher than it was the day Donald Trump got elected 3 short months
Mhm.
ago. So it's not really outside of the zip code of that happening. But having said that, at 75, I'm a long-term holder of Bitcoin. I'm a buyer at 75. I will be stepping into the marketplace with some capital that we've got put aside for that type of weakness. I'll be buying it. And you know, again, I actually agree with them. I think your near-term low end price target's 75, 78. Your high end is probably 180. And it's gonna trade, unfortunately, with that level of volatility. A lot of people don't believe in Bitcoin. David, a lot of people write research reports that are very negative and say that Bitcoin's worthless. You have the Buffett acolytes think it's worthless. I think if you really study it, you realize that it's not worthless, but that's okay. That's what makes a market. There was years where people told me Amazon was a overvalued bookseller. It's not. It's an A to Z, 55% of the market share of internet retail.
You mentioned Warren Buffett hoarding a record amount of cash. Scares me. What do you make of it?
Yeah, it has me concerned. I think Buffett is 93. He's still got his marbles. He's got incredible amount of wisdom. Sorry about that. Just cut that off. He's 93. Incredible amount of wisdom about him. A brilliant guy. I think he looks at everything in our space and he says the uh, the uh, the things are out of whack. Earnings not moving fast enough, valuations high. He's looking at the overall market capitalization of the market to the GDP of the country. Anytime it gets to this high percentage, he gets worried. And so he starts hoarding cash. And I think that that's a sign that he's worried, and by the way, he sold assets that he likes even. He's shed things like Apple, some of the bank stocks he's been a long-term holder in. So he did this in '07. He did this in '07 on the way into '08. And of course, when the debacle happened, he was one of the last people standing with tremendous amounts of cash to defend the financial system and to help companies like GE and Bank America, of course, very famously Goldman Sachs. But I would say this to you. He's going to be right short term. Maybe there'll be a big correction in the market, but let's really channel Buffett. What is Buffett's average holding period? Okay, it's 42 years.
Right.
Buffett tells you he doesn't like selling things, and I think the lesson in my 35-year career, I've sold things too quickly. You could capitulate. Microsoft had 10 years where it did nothing. Many people, myself included, capitulated on Microsoft, and then guess what? It went on to go 10 to 1. If you just held the asset, you were okay. And so I hear you. Buffett is raising alarm bells, but I would just recommend to your viewers and listeners, buy high quality, stay in high quality, ignore short-term price movements.
And one last question on crypto before we move into some politics is trust has long been an issue, at least for the outsiders, people like myself. What does it do when you see all these meme coins rush up, rush down, in particular when the president of the United States starts his own meme coin that's now fully diluted value of $13 billion? It's nothing, Mooch. You know that. It literally has no inherent value. What does that do to trust in digital currencies?
Well, listen, I don't like it. I think what you have to say to people about Donald Trump, and obviously I have a lot of experience with him, and some of it was success in terms of helping him win in 16, and some of it was failure in terms of me getting fired from the White House. But with Donald Trump, you get everything. There's no a la carte menu at the Donald Trump restaurant. It is a buffet table, and you have to eat everything at the table. So there are things at the table you may not like. You may not like his personal grifting. You may not like his meme coins. You may not like the deals he's willing to do with the Saudis or the vote that he's willing to grant at the UN where he's voting with North Korea and he's voting with Russia, and he's telling people that the Ukrainians started the Ukrainian-Russian war. Okay, so which is obviously not even congruent with the facts. And so you get all of that. Then you get maybe some tax cuts. You get maybe some corporate deregulation. You get maybe some positive stuff on cryptocurrencies, maybe a definitive stablecoin legislation, something like that. But what you're not able to do with Donald Trump is I'm just going to take this off the menu or that off the menu. You get everything. So him starting a meme coin 24, 48 hours before he became president, I think contributed to the current weakness in the market. I think the zone got flooded with meme coins. It's not just his meme coin and Melania's meme coin. There's probably been 50 of them that's been launched since he put out that meme coin in January. Solana was at 293. Solana is really one of the havens in the cryptocurrency world, the layer one technology that a lot of these meme coins use. And so that was at 293 3 weeks ago. It's in the 130s now. It's been cut in half. And so, yeah, I think Trump has helped crypto and contemporaneously hurt crypto. But that's what you get with Donald Trump.
Is there a Mooch coin?
So I actually think there is a Mooch coin. I was on CNBC deriding these coins, and then somebody set up a Mooch coin. You can set up a Briggs coin today. You go on that website and say we're going to have a Briggs coin, and I know somebody told me it got to a few $1 million of market capitalization. It's not affiliated with me. I don't endorse it. I'm not related to it. The one thing I can tell you with great certainty is you will not see a meme coin emanate from SkyBridge or me personally. I think these are really bad for the market. And to your point, they're worthless gambling tokens. And I think that they distract from something like Bitcoin. I have people say to me, oh, Bitcoin is just a big meme coin. But the truth of the matter is, if you really understand Bitcoin, it's actually not. It is a decentralized, fully transparent ledger that we can use with each other to track and store value and to innovate the financial services system. So anybody that really understands Bitcoin, I think, gets positive on it. I mean, let me rephrase that. I think is important. If you had 100 people super study Bitcoin, I think 90 plus of them go towards Bitcoin. The Paul Tudor Joneses, the Ray Dalios, the Stan Druckenmillers of the world go towards Bitcoin, the Michael Saylors. All of those people had some level of skepticism, including Michael Saylor. Before he became a Bitcoin maximalist, he was a skeptic. And I think the more homework you do, the more comfortable you get with Bitcoin.
You mentioned the U.S. vote with North Korea against our European allies, essentially failing to blame Russia for invading Ukraine. What does it mean, and what do you make of it? Why would President Trump want to vote with Russia here?
Well, let's take his side of it for a second. He's trying to say that Russia felt threatened by the Ukraine, and they felt
Which is
threatened by.
nonsense.
Well, I'm just again giving you his side because obviously it's nonsense, and to provide great hypocrisy, great facts for the hypocrisy, Finland And Sweden just joined NATO. They're neighboring states to Russia. He let them in, didn't declare war on them. This has to do with that area of the world, the warm water port in Crimea, the historical Peter the Great legacy of the 300 years of control of the Ukraine. And this is, he would like a puppet installed in the Ukraine that he's running, meaning Vladimir Putin running as a former KGB agent, as opposed to a full-fledged democracy. He doesn't want a full-fledged, economically growing, technologically advantaged democracy like the Ukraine that has many relatives, many cultural associations. Finland and Sweden are different, Dave. The Ukraine is similar. There's a lot of Russians in the Ukraine. He doesn't want any more than the Chinese would like North Korea to be a thriving economy like South Korea is, that close to their border. Vladimir Putin doesn't want that. But Trump is using his talking points, and Trump is saying, well, this is the reason why, and it's Ukraine's fault that they wanted to join NATO, and they're threatening Russia by joining NATO, and they shouldn't be allowed to join NATO. But listen, that's a bunch of garbage. Remember, the Ukraine gave up, and again, I shouldn't say the Ukraine; it's actually Ukraine because they get up sensitive about that. So let me restate that: Ukraine actually gave up their nuclear missiles, and they gave up their stockpile. They were the sixth largest nuclear arsenal in the world, and they gave that up in exchange for Western security guarantees. There's been hundreds of years of fighting over that land. The Ukrainians wanted some level of sovereignty and some semblance of a democracy, and the Russians are threatened by that. Somebody like Vladimir Putin, who's winning his elections 88, 90% to 10, which we know that these elections are primarily made up, he doesn't want a pluralistic democracy on his doorstep that has people in it that look and act and are culturally the same as his own people. But Trump is on the side of Putin. Someone will have to.
But why? But it's
None
that
of us,
coddling of Putin going back to
Dave,
Helsinki that independents like myself just don't understand.
none of us could figure it out. H.R. McMaster, I've asked that question. General Kelly, Jim Mattis, I've asked that question of. None of us can figure it out. There's some journalists that believe that he had a money laundering spigot going with Russian oligarchs, and that's the reason why his two sons said prior to the 2016 election that they got their money from Vladimir Putin's oligarchs, that's all their money came from for all the real estate investing deals. I don't know. I'm not close enough to it, but I can say this to you. He acts either as a stooge and a useful idiot of Vladimir Putin, or he's somehow tied to Vladimir Putin economically or otherwise that we don't understand. But it's the same cause and effect. You have the president of the United States literally reading Russian talking points at press conferences and now voting against the historical allies of the American government and the freedom of democracies here in the West. And he's voting with the North Korean dictator and the Russian dictator at the UN. So I find it reprehensible. I find it very interesting that somebody like Marco Rubio, that knows it's reprehensible, is trying to pretend that it isn't. I mean, when Marco opens his mouth now, it looks like a twisted pretzel is coming out of his mouth. I mean, his tongue is so tied up from trying to explain something that he knows doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, the moment he said make Gaza beautiful again, I stopped believing that Marco Rubio would be the one to save democracy. And the biggest news of the day, probably though, is Doge and Elon Musk now giving 2 million federal workers an extra day. He sent out this email. What did you do last week? Asking them to outline what they did in bullet form. And if they didn't respond, it was considered a resignation. Essentially, AI would evaluate whether or not they were able to keep their jobs. What do you make of the thought of it and the execution of it?
Well, listen, the thought of it, I think, is very strong. I don't know any American that doesn't want somebody to help them look through the government and try to delayer the government and cut out some waste. I think the execution of it and the process is flawed, and I'll go back to Clinton and Gore. They set up a process. They had Democrats in there, they had Republicans in there, they had judges, they had a whole full-fledged process, and they went through things methodically. you get about 200,000 people leave the American government workforce a year just through attrition. And so then the question is, do you hire those people back or replace them, or are you looking for more people to retire? And the Clinton Gore regime, net of those government losses, we shed 370,000 people in the government during the 90s. And of course, they were cutting costs on the margin. They did get a deal done with Newt Gingrich, and they were running a budget surplus when Clinton and Gore left Washington. So people do like this stuff, and this stuff does work. But I think the way Elon is going about it with these young men is nerve-wracking to people. They don't know if that process is the right type of process to have in the world's currently the world's oldest democracy. So to me, I'm for the process. I'm for cost cutting. I find it very hard to find people that are against cutting waste out of the government. But I think we do live in a democracy. We got to be careful. And so they're going hard. They're revving up the chainsaw, and they're letting go national security workers that we need. They're letting go nuclear arsenal or stockpile workers that we need, and we've got to hire them back. They let go the avian flu pandemic experts, and it turned out that we need those guys, and so we've hired them back. And so I think this sort of stop-start activity
Mhm.
without a process, it may work in places like Twitter, now known as X. It may work at SpaceX, but I will tell you, based on my life experience, my short stay in the government, my time in the administrations or the pre-administration's transition team, where I served as one of the executive chairman for Trump's transition team, the government is not like a business. And people that say that, well, we got to run the government like a business, they don't really understand. You can't run the government like a business. It's a service provision that's typically set up by the population in a society because it's non for profit. We're sending firemen into buildings, burning buildings, or we're saving people that are about to get a cardiac arrest, and we're not paying a lot of money to those people to actually do that. But there's a lot of infrastructure and services that are required, and it's not a business. And I think if you think about it or try to run it like a business, I think you're going to wreak havoc and you're going to cause a cultural problem.
And if we're running it like a business, we'd want to avoid conflicts of interest. News today that the FAA cut a deal with Starlink. There's a $400 million deal that signed after Trump was elected with Tesla. Many of the departments he's cutting had direct oversight over several, if not all, of his companies.
Yeah.
That is a major issue for the American people. How long do you think this relationship will last? No one knows better than you. No
Yeah.
one shares the stage with
Yeah.
Donald Trump long. How long can Elon?
Well, I said at the onset that it would last longer than people thought because, Trump needs him. Trump, he spent $300 million to help Trump win. He's a very, very rich guy. Trump loves rich people. He wants to keep him close. He sees him as a fount for potential capital on deals. And so he's going to curry favor with him. He also owns Twitter, which Trump knows how powerful Twitter is. And I guess, the second question is I think it's going to last longer. It'll fizzle. It's not going to be Pyrrhic. It's not going to blow up like other Trump relationships. They're mutually entwined. They may get bored or tired of each other, and he may cease doing the stuff that he's doing at Doge in a couple of months, and it may not be nearly as effective if either of them wanted to be. But I don't see them having a Pyrrhic blow up. They just need each other too much. But I think the real issue is you have to ask the Democrats, why did the Democrats let Elon Musk out of the nest? Why did they let Bobby Kennedy out of the nest? Excuse me, they had Elon Musk for multiple decades. He was the green guy with the electric vehicles, and they shoved him around. They wouldn't invite him to the rocket summit. They didn't invite him to the EV summit. Or I think worse than that, Dave, they invited him to the EV summit. The UAW president said he can't be invited because he's not a union guy, so they disinvited him. And so you inflamed him to the point where he and other Silicon Valley executives that were all left leaning, all Democrats, they all ran into the arms of Donald Trump. Bobby Kennedy ran into the Tulsi Gabbard was lambasting the Democrats for not giving Bernie Sanders a bigger chance. And these are all former Democrats working for Donald Trump. And as you know, and I know, Donald Trump is a former Democrat. So I don't know how they did this. I'm not sure what happened there, but I think there's questions that have to be asked both sides. How did you
Mhm.
let all those guys out of the fold because they helped to lead Trump to victory? And then secondarily, you know, you tell me how long this thing will last with Donald Trump. I don't think it lasts forever, but it's going to last longer than people think because of the money associated with it.
Yeah, I think it's already lasted
Yeah.
longer than many thought. I assume you are still a Republican, but you can clarify that. And
No,
what do
I'm
you
still a
make of,
Republican.
yeah, what do
Yeah.
you make of James Carville's strategy he laid out in a New York Times op-ed today that Democrats should, quote, roll over and play dead and essentially let Donald Trump punch himself out and collapse?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting strategy. He's probably writing that because that's what they're doing anyway. You know,
What they've done for years.
they don't have any clarity to their leadership. They don't have any organized dissent. They're running an old folks home in the Senate. If you look at people like Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren, they're nice people, but they should be off the stage. There should be younger people representing the state of Massachusetts or the great state of New York at this point. And so they don't even have the energy or the commitment to go after these people. Hakeem Jeffries is a nice person. I saw him on the Sunday shows this weekend. He's not ready for prime time. He's not acceptable to what I would call the non-coastal Americans. And so they got to reinvigorate their team, and they got to come up with a better narrative. But Carville's basically saying that Trump and Musk are crazy and they're going to burn themselves out and turn public opinion against them. He may be right, but I think that the Democrats need organized dissent, and they need to coalesce around a few leaders to provide clarity about what their vision is to bring to America in 26 and again in 28.
Fascinating times. I could continue this conversation all day long. Really enjoyed the conversation, though. Founder and managing partner of SkyBridge, former White House press secretary, host of the Rest is Politics US podcast, Anthony Scaramucci. Really appreciate the time. Look
Great,
forward to talking to you again soon.
great to be on with you, brother.
See you, buddy.
All right. All right. So we'll get in touch. Okay. We'll meet up next week. We'll do some brainstorming with you.
I
All right.
appreciate that very
Good
much.
luck, my man.
Thanks, bud.
Bye bye.